This is lesson 7.5, problem-solving investigation. Determine reasonable answers. My dad painted 25% of my bedroom in 28 minutes. I think the whole project will take about 3 hours. Your mission is to determine whether it is reasonable for Doug's dad to paint the bedroom in 3 hours. In our problem-solving process, understand, plan, solve, and look back. We ask, 25% of the room has been painted in 28 minutes. Doug thinks it will take a total of 3 hours to paint the whole room. Is this a reasonable answer? Since 25% or 1/4 of the room was painted in about 30 minutes, use a model for 25%. And here we have a rectangle divided into 4 equal parts. 25% of that represents 30 minutes. If we use the same model, and we project out 30 minutes for each fourth of the room, we get 30 minutes times 4, which is 120 minutes, or closer to 2 hours than 3 hours. So 30 minutes is a half an hour. Since a half hour times 4 is 2, 2 hours is a reasonable answer. 3 is not quite as reasonable. Analyze the strategy. Describe other problem-solving strategies that you could use to determine whether the answer is reasonable. Some that we've explored are look for a rule or pattern in the data, number facts, estimate, guess and check, make an organized list, or work backwards. Write 2 word problems. One should have a reasonable answer and the other should not. My 2 problems are: the cost of Tracy's meal was $14.56. She wanted to leave a 15% tip, so she left $1.50. Well, if we round $14.56 to 15, 10% of that is $1.50, and half of that is $75. So that's over $2. So $1.50 would not be a reasonable tip. It's not quite enough. Not if the goal is 15%. The cost of Tracy's meal was $14.50. She wanted to leave a 15% tip, so she left $2.20. That is a much more reasonable answer, because 10% of 15, if we round to 15, 10% of that is $1.50. Half of that, representing the other 5%, is 75%. This is 10%. This is 5%. For a total of 15, gives us $2.25. So the $2.20 is a much more reasonable answer. When solving problems, oftentimes it's helpful to determine reasonable answers by using rounding or estimation. Checking answers with a calculator is also helpful to determine if the answer found is in fact reasonable. In this example, there is a 4.8% sales tax on all clothing items purchased. Danielle wants to buy a shirt which costs $18.95. Danielle figures that if she has $20, she will have enough to buy the shirt. After adding in sales tax, is $20 a reasonable estimate for Danielle to bring? Reasonable amount. The cost of the shirt is $18.95. The sales tax is 4.8%. Danielle has $20. That's the understand part of the process. We round $18.95 to 19. We round 4.8% to 5. Then we use mental math to find 5% of 19. 10% of 19 is $1.90. We round $1.90 to $2. 5% is half of 10%, so half of $2. This estimate here of 10% is $1. So we estimate the sales tax to be $1. The estimated cost of the shirt is $19. So $20 is a reasonable amount of money for Daniel to bring to pay for the shirt. If we calculate the exact answer by taking 4.8%, which we convert to a decimal 0.48, times $18.95, we find the actual cost of the sales tax as being 90.9 cents, or about $1. So it is a reasonable answer. Jillian and Roger have lunch at a restaurant, and Jillian needs to determine how much tip to leave based on her bill. If the bill was $21.87 and Jillian wants to leave a 15% tip, what is a reasonable estimate? Well, we're going to round $21.87 to $22. We find 10% of that, which is $2.20. We simply divide by 10 or move our decimal point one place to the left. Half of that $2.20 is $1.10. So $3.30 is a reasonable estimate for a tip. Problem number 2. Of the 82,000 fans that attended a bowl game between Ohio State and Notre Dame, 60% were Ohio State fans. Well, if we round 82,000 to 80,000, and we find 60% of that, which means we multiply by 0.60, we get 48,000 Ohio State fans. What they want to know, though, is how many Notre Dame fans there are. So we have to take the 82,000, or we'll take our rounded 80,000, subtract our 48,000 Ohio State fans, and what we're then left with is 32,000 Notre Dame fans. A survey of 1,950 people found that 39% preferred chocolate ice cream to vanilla. About how many people prefer chocolate ice cream according to the survey? Well, if we take 40% of 2,000, we take 10% of 2,000 is 200. That's 10%. 10%. So then we take that times 4, and we get 800. If 10% is 200, then 4 times that much would be 40%, and therefore 800 people of our 1,950 people prefer chocolate ice cream. Surface of the Earth is approximately 70% water. If the surface area is about 510 million square kilometers, about how much surface area are water? Well, we're going to find 70% of 500 million. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find 10% of that divided by 10, which gives me 50 million. That's 10%. I simply divide by 10, move my decimal point one place to the left. If I take that times 7 to get my 70%, I get 350 million as a reasonable estimate for the number of square kilometers that are water. Number 5. Of 7,450 first-year college students interviewed, 72% had changed their major area of study since the beginning of the academic year. About how many students had kept the same major? Well, again, if we do 70% of 7,500, we're going to find 10% of this, which is 750. That represents 10% because we simply divide by 10 here. If we take 750 times 7, we get 5,250 people. Now that's the number of people that change their majors. What they actually want is the number of people who kept their majors. So we go back to our estimate here of 7,500, and we subtract, and we get approximately 2,250 people that kept their majors. Check for understanding. The total bill at a restaurant for a family of 5 is $64.72. They want to leave a $20 tip. If they decide to leave $10, is this estimate reasonable? Well, let's see. Let's do this. Let's round 64.72 to 65. If we find 10% of that, we simply divide by 10, so we get $6.50. if we double that to get 20%, we get $13 for a tip. So is $10 a reasonable tip? No, it is not. It's a little short. Example number 2. A recent survey showed that 67% of students watch 3 or more hours of television a night. Suppose there are 892 students in your school. What would be a reasonable estimate of the number of students in your school who watch 3 or more hours of television? Explain your answers. Well, I'm going to take 67% and I'm going to round that to 66 2/3%, which I know as a fraction is 2/3. Then I'm going to round my 892 students to 900. And I'm going to take 2/3 of 900 because those are compatible numbers. I divide by 3. I get 300 here. 2 times 300. I'm going to say about 600 students watch 3 or more hours of TV per night. That's 600 out of about 900. Okay, Benito skied for 13.5 hours and estimated he spent 30% of his time on the ski slope. Did he spend 4, 6, or 8 hours? Well, let's see. If I take 30% of 13.5, I'm going to round this to 14. I'm going to just take 0.3 times 14. That gives me about 4.2 hours. So the best answer here would be 4 hours. Number 2. The class trip at Wilson Middle School cost $145 per student. The fundraiser earned 38% of this cost. Will each student have to pay 70, 80, or 90s? Well, I'm going to take 38%. I'm going to round that to 40%. I'm going to round my 145 to 150. So I'm going to find 40% of 150. Make those compatible. So 0.4 times 150 gives me about $60 earned. Now, if we take 150 minus 60, then each student will have to pay about $90. Okay, number 3, Miguel's car gets 38 miles per gallon and it has 2.5 gallon tank. Has 2.5 gallons left in the tank. Can he drive 85, 95, or 100 miles? If we round his mileage to 40 and we take that times 2, we get 80 miles. If we take half of 40, we get 20. And we add those together. He can drive about 100 miles. That's a little bit of an overestimate. We're going to say he can drive about 95 miles. Because by rounding this up, we're overestimating at 100. Our best, most reasonable answer would be 95. Number 4, at a restaurant, the total cost of a meal is $87.50. Nadia wants to leave a $20 tip. She should leave a total of 95. Total now of 95, 105, or 115. Well, if we round 87 to 90, we find 10% of 90, which is 9. We double that to 18 because that gives us 20%. If she spent 90 on the bill, or on the food, and 18 on the tip, that's about 108. We're thinking about 105. That's a 108 is a little bit of an overestimate. 115 would be too much. At this point, you should quit watching the video and go to Naiku, www.naiku.net, and take lesson quiz 7.5.